We lay a tremendous weight on the broad shoulders of the farms of this world. A level of need that the natural systems of this earth were not prepared to handle.
Can we feed the world and save the world? Nitrogen is at the heart of that question, because how we manage our complicated relationship with this essential resource is going to be how we answer that question. Can we feed the world and save the world?
Chemical nitrogen fertilizer has allowed us to support and feed the modern world, but its negative effects on our environment are unsustainable. The problems humanity faces are all connected. Everything on this earth is connected. You can't face one unless we face them all. And at the center of it all is the nitrogen dilemma.
Nitrogen is the stuff of life. It's one of the most important elements we have. It's the fourth most abundant element in the human body. And without it, there would be no life on this planet.
We have this dilemma that as life on Earth, the atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. We are bathed in nitrogen, yet nitrogen is one of the most difficult nutrients for life on Earth to access, because the nitrogen in the atmosphere is largely biologically unavailable.
The air, water, and soil of this planet are all part of the nitrogen cycle. All are impacted by the use of nitrogen fertilizer, and each hold the solutions to solving the problems it creates. Farmers who work the land see these impacts up close and have a unique perspective on the problem. The health of our planet's soil is as important to human life as the air we breathe. We know more about the atmosphere above us than we do about the soil below us. Gerlach Farms has worked this land for 4 generations, a time span that has seen the rise of modern farming.
I've been lucky enough to be a son of a farmer, and now I've been very blessed to have my son that wants to farm. So I take it as a very strong responsibility to become a better steward of the land and the soil to be able to pass that down to the next generation. Thousands of years ago, when the glacial till came through, it carved out this flat, loamy prairie that we've turned into a production monster. And you don't want to mess that up. This is where it all begins. Literally, this is what it's all about for us. We've been blessed with 2 foot of Iowa black topsoil. The secret is in the soil. There's so many nutrients in this black dirt.
Soil is the foundation of our agricultural systems. It contains the air, water, and the nutrients that plants need to grow and produce food for us.
Right there's where it started. We're wanting this, a deep green color chlorophyll from the sun. To get this, we needed moisture. And then what combines all that? Fertilizer and nutrients in this soil. End result is right here. Look at these taproots. This is what our goal is, right here.
Just 1 teaspoon of soil has hundreds of millions of microorganisms and nutrients, and they make up a vast subterranean network of life. Yet plant growth is limited by the nutrient that is least present in the soil.
Nitrogen's not only the #1 element that we need for corn production, we have to supplement corn production with more nitrogen at levels that the soil doesn't produce to get our maximum yield.
Plants rely on tiny microbes in the soil to create plant-ready nitrogen in the form of ammonia. In this way, nitrogen is at the center of a virtuous cycle that benefits plants, animals, and people. But the system has limits to how much food it can produce, limits that the modern world surpassed long ago. About 200 years ago, our population began to grow exponentially, and with it the demand for food. With plant-ready nitrogen being in short supply in the soil, farmers looked for sources of nitrogen fertilizer to keep up the supply of food. The largest known source was actually bird droppings on tiny rock islands off the coast of Peru. This was such a precious resource, it was collected and shipped all over the world. Yet it wasn't enough. Then two German scientists, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch, developed a chemical process that took nitrogen out of the air and under high pressure and temperature, converted it into ammonia in the form of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer.
The Haber-Bosch process was probably the most important invention humanity has ever created. There are estimates out there showing that if we hadn't had the Haber-Bosch process, we would have been able to support about half the population that is currently on this planet.
Unfortunately, the energy it takes to create synthetic nitrogen fertilizer relies heavily upon the use of large amounts of fossil fuels, not only in its creation, but also in the worldwide shipping and distribution of it. Then, once in the ground, almost half of the synthetic nitrogen applied to crops doesn't reach the plants and is released into our air and water. What was once a great invention has become a problem.
My grandfather would probably be one of the first ones to use synthetic nitrogen. That worked for a long time. We know it's a vital part of the corn production, and we're always conscious of big rains or denitrification, how we apply, how it gets put into the plant. It's a constant battle of what's the best way, when's the best time, how do we get it into the plant without losing it, into the water source.
There are a number of downsides of relying on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. First, the production of it is so fossil fuel intense. But then once we get it to the farm, we're putting on large amounts in short periods of time. And they don't really have an opportunity to cycle through the soil, and they are ultimately lost to the environment.
Because of the unique chemistry of the nitrogen cycle, called the nitrogen cascade, one atom of nitrogen, when it enters into a field or into the soil, it can go on a chemical journey where it actually contributes to multiple environmental problems. So the same atom of nitrogen, when it's applied as fertilizer, can first get emitted to the air and contribute to air pollution. It can then get dropped into a water body and contribute to dead zones like the one in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, and can then be transformed yet again into a greenhouse gas, an ozone-depleting substance. So you get this whole cycle of environmental impact.
We're all concerned when we hear the news about nitrates going into our water. There's probably no one, well, I can state that as a fact, because there's no one more concerned than me as the farmer. This is my life, and I don't want to hear about my nitrogen fertilizer going into the water stream.
Less than 1% of the water on Earth is fresh water, flowing through rivers, lakes, and underground aquifers. And that's all the fresh water we have for the entire planet. Of that, around 70% is used for agriculture.
A mega drought is choking the western and southwestern regions of the U.S.
Signs have been posted at beaches notifying the public to keep a lookout for algae blooms.
The Colorado River Basin, a lifeline of the American Southwest, is shrinking.
Fish are washing ashore in droves in southwest Florida.
That algae is considered at least 20 times more toxic than what health experts say is safe for human exposure.
By 2050, feeding a planet of 9 billion people will require an estimated 50% increase in agricultural production and a 15% increase in water withdrawals. The way we manage our water use will be vital to our survival.
All life revolves around water. People always congregate around water. It's used for logistics, it's used to sustain life, it's used to irrigate crops. Fundamentally, it's carrying one of the most important elements that we are able to consume. So we want to protect it and take care of it. It's the one thing we can't live without, is fresh water. And maintaining and taking care of it is top priority for everyone, including farmers.
Rivers and streams are the lifeblood of agriculture, connecting farmers all over the world through shared waterways. Managing water use is essential for farmers, whether they are up or downstream.
You've got the St. Francis River here, the floodway, and then the Mississippi. It's pure sand, lots of deposit, but very poor organic matter in the soil. So, you're looking out here at, 20 to 30 years of better techniques. And we're actually starting, when we turn the soil, to see something in it. We put this stuff in place because we want to get really, really efficient at irrigation. We don't abuse our water table. We're very proud of that water table because that's what makes this land what it is.
Our fresh water is an increasingly scarce resource, so protecting water sources from nitrogen runoff has never been more important.
When nitrogen gets into the form of nitrate, it goes into waterways and it leads to algae blooms. And algae, as it grows, sucks up oxygen out of the water, leaving little oxygen for any other life form in the water, which starves other aquatic life forms like fish. And so you get these massive die-offs of aquatic life.
The damage that nitrates cause comes from excess fertilizer the plants didn't even use. Finding better ways to deliver nitrogen to crops would have a positive impact on the farmer's bottom line and the environment. Across the river, rice grows submerged in water, which takes a different set of solutions to keep nitrates out of our rivers.
So when you look at sustainability, you're trying to affect three things. What are you doing with the soil? What are you doing with the water? What are you doing with the air? With our smart rice, we're able to lower our runoffs. Our water is nice and clean when it leaves the farm. We're reducing greenhouse gas, and we're able to reduce our water use to about 50% of the national average. So this farm has 3 reservoirs, 2 tailwater recoveries, and everything is self-contained. Water never leaves the farm unless we want it to. When it leaves here, it's crystal clear. It's good for anybody downstream. We pride ourselves in making sure our water that leaves our farm is not having an adverse effect on anybody in the Gulf or anybody downstream.
The effects of climate change on the global weather patterns grow stronger each year. Drought, heavy rains, and unpredictable temperatures directly affect farmers and their ability to grow healthy crops for the rest of the world.
Weather on a whole is the biggest thing we deal with. And since you can't control the weather, we've tried to adapt our practices and our techniques to be able to handle the extremes, which we're seeing as more common now than we did 100 years ago.
It's hard to overstate the importance of the atmosphere when it comes to the weather. Like any natural system, balance in the atmosphere is crucial. Human activity is disrupting this balance, which is in turn disrupting life down on the surface.
I grew up, thought that I would never be back to the farm. We really wanted to teach our children the value of agriculture, the value of hard work. I'm really proud of the work that we do on our farm and that we try to make sure we're always taking care of the land first. We have to be good. We have to pay attention to what we're doing from an environmental standpoint and how we're taking care of our land and our crops.
Farmers have a lot of tools and practices at their disposal to address environmental challenges. Plants pull carbon from the air and store it in the soil. When we disturb that soil, carbon releases back into the atmosphere. No-till farming helps to keep that carbon in the ground.
These are our no-till soybeans. As you can see, there's a lot of residue, corn residue left from the previous year. So one year we plant corn, the next year we plant soybeans. One of the benefits for growing soybeans is that it is a legume. So a legume will fix nitrogen from the air as well. And so the soybean crop will leave nitrogen in the soil that we are able to utilize for our corn crop the following year. So that's healthy for both the environment and our pocketbook.
The production, transportation, and application of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer accounts for 2% of all greenhouse gas emissions. That's just to get it to the field. It takes an immense amount of energy to create synthetic nitrogen, which is mainly supplied by the burning of fossil fuels. This nitrogen must then be shipped from chemical plants to fields all over the world. Then, once in the ground, some of it is lost back into our atmosphere.
So when nitrogen is lost to the atmosphere as ammonia or nitrogen oxides, those are two of the most important components of air pollution that lead to increased respiratory illnesses and cardiovascular disease. When nitrogen goes into the atmosphere as nitrous oxide, it is the third most important greenhouse gas. After carbon dioxide and methane, it's responsible for somewhere between 5 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions.
This is where the climate crisis and the nitrogen dilemma converge. Nitrous oxide released into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. To save the planet for future generations, we must solve our nitrogen problem.
About 1% of the global energy consumption is used to make fertilizer. That's a lot. That's just to grow our crops. So what can we do and how can we change our practices to reduce that?
Better farming techniques to minimize the loss of nitrogen into the environment are a first step in solving our nitrogen dilemma.
I think I am equipping my kids for the future because of the lessons they've learned on the farm and how we have to adjust to whatever's happening. They have learned to adapt as well.
Adapting is probably one of the main things that a farmer needs to do. If you don't adapt, you get left behind.
Advances in science and technology are helping every day to get us closer to solving the nitrogen dilemma.
If we don't manage nitrogen well, nitrogen pollution can make all of these environmental and human health problems worse. If we manage our relationship with nitrogen better, you can have a whole array of co-benefits greater than pretty much any other environmental problem. And as more and more countries and global declarations highlight the importance of halving nitrogen pollution by 2030, we're going to need as many different types of technologies and practices on the table as possible.
Here we see a number of the strategies we use to reduce nitrate loss from the landscape. We've got a buffer that can treat some of the nitrate being lost in the drainage water before it gets to the stream. We see the corn already growing and out of the ground, lengthening the period of crops that we have on the soil throughout the year. Things like cover crops are great strategies to reduce nitrate loss from the fields before it enters the streams.
This is a cover crop of triticale. This is one of the many cover crops that we use, from rye to wheat to oats. We need this to enhance our soils. There shouldn't be a time that we have fallow sitting ground. So you should have something living in this soil all the time.
Practices like reduced tillage, buffer zones, and cover crops can only get us so far. We can't really solve these problems until we begin to replace nitrogen fertilizer.
That's why, as farmers, we're constantly looking at new technologies, and we're looking at ways that we can get better and more efficient with what we have, both from an environmental standpoint and an economic standpoint. And so that's one of the reasons why we've used some nitrogen-fixing microbes, because they are more environmentally friendly. It's another way to bring fertilizer and to increase the health of our plant.
Microbes in our soil live in a mutually beneficial relationship with the plants. The sugar from their roots provide the microbes with the fuel they need to create plant-ready nitrogen in the form of ammonia, living organisms that act as tiny nitrogen factories in the soil.
If you were to stick your hand in the soil and look, use a microscope and look under that microscope, you would see millions or billions of microbes there. We found microbes that have the natural ability to convert the nitrogen that's in the atmosphere into a form that the plant can use. A microbe that feeds that plant the nitrogen that it needs so that all of the nitrogen that is being produced by the microbe is actually being absorbed by the plants.
By replacing synthetic nitrogen fertilizer with nitrogen-fixing microbes, like Pivot Bio's products, what you end up with is an immediate and a permanent change to practice that can't be achieved any other way. That means you're not using a chemical that has been produced in an intense industrial process that consumes a lot of petroleum. You're not applying nitrogen in bulk to the soil where it can be lost to wind and weather.
This little microbe lives on the roots of the corn plant. And so that microbe fixes nitrogen from the air, converts it to ammonium, which the plant can immediately take up, and it spoon feeds the plant. This technology is the holy grail of agriculture.
As the farmer, Pivot Bio is reassuring that once I put it in the furrow and on the seed, it's there. And when the corn plant asks for nitrogen, it's giving it to it. I don't know how much better we're going to have it than that.
We have already today the technologies and practices to reduce nitrogen pollution by 50% in many parts of the world without impacting food security. And it doesn't just make sense from an environmental perspective, it makes sense from an economic perspective.
A 120-acre field of corn typically uses 25 tons of synthetic fertilizer a year. The cost in fuel and man-hours alone is a lot.
Any steps that we can take to reduce our reliance on synthetic fertilizer is a game changer for us in agriculture. It helps us to reduce our input costs from an environmental standpoint, and from a production standpoint, that's where we need to head as a producer and as a grower.
There's an immediate benefit, not just to the grower and the economics of the harvest that they produce, but to our planet and to the sustainability and longevity of all of our natural resources.
The creation of microbes as a fertilizer substitute requires only 2% of the energy that it takes to create the same amount of chemical nitrogen. Plus, it reduces energy use during shipping and application. More importantly, though, the knowledge that the nitrogen goes into the plant instead of our water and air is a big win. It's solutions like these, along with practices like cover crops and tailwater recovery, that will make it possible to fight climate change, purify our fresh water, and keep our soil healthy enough to feed a growing world population.
There's never been more policy visibility on this topic. There's never been more technologies and practices that can help us address this problem about where we get our food, how we get our food, and ensuring that we can't just feed the world, but that we save the world at the same time.
Because agricultural land is so intensively managed, we have many opportunities to improve the system and reduce soil erosion, improve nutrient use efficiency, and store carbon from the atmosphere in the soil.
So I'm hopeful that we can achieve ambitious targets, that we can stay within safe planetary limits for nitrogen, and that we can still produce enough food to feed the planet.
The world's farmers control over 4 billion acres of land worldwide. With the right innovations and practices, they have the power to solve the nitrogen dilemma.
As a farmer, I constantly want to do better, taking care of my soil better, taking care of the land better, taking care of that plant that I'm growing. I want to do better.
As I look out over the horizon, this is the responsibility I have to take care of this land. It doesn't come easy. There's a lot of hard work. And sometimes you will question yourself, why? But I know I've made the right decision.
Everything on this planet is connected, from the air to the water to the earth below our feet. From farmers to consumers, to scientists to politicians, we all have a part to play in solving the nitrogen dilemma and restoring balance to our natural systems. By working together, we can all continue to thrive on this planet as a species.